The first thing he noticed was the silence. Not true silence. Stalingrad in November of 1942 was never silent, but a sudden, localized absence. The crump of distant mortars, the staccato cough of a machine gun across the river, the everlasting whisper of ash and snow on rubble, all of it remained. But the familiar, reassuring scuff of his partner's boot, the soft click of a safety being switched, the steady breathing from the other side of the blown-out piano, all that had stopped. Private Anatoly Chekov, just turned 19, lay perfectly still, his cheek welded to the cold stock of his Mosin Nagant rifle, and knew his spotter was dead. A single, perfect shot through the temple. No warning, no sound preceding it. He was alone in the skeleton of what had been a composer's apartment, and somewhere in the labyrinth of shattered brick, twisted steel, and frozen corpses that was the factory district, a hunter had just announced his presence. This was no frantic lancer spraying with an MP40. This was a predator, an Anatoly, the physics student from Leningrad who had learned to shoot in a Komsol club, was now the prey. 6 weeks earlier, the 284th Rifle Division had ferried across the Volga under a sky on fire. Anatoly, along with thousands of other green recruits, huddled in the leaky barge, watching the city bleed light into the smoky heavens. The air tasted of burning oil and fear. They'd been handed rifles, 60 rounds of ammunition, and told, "The motherland is on the other side. Go." Some got a rifle, no ammunition. They were told to find some from the dead. That was his introduction to Stalingrad, a lesson in economy. He survived the meat grinder of the landing beaches through dumb luck and a capacity for stillness he hadn't known he possessed. While others screamed and charged into German MG-42 fire, Anatoly found himself pressed into the oily Volga mud, observing. He saw the parabolic arc of mortars, calculated their launch points in his head, and inched away before the next salvo landed. He noticed how a German machine gunner would fire in 3-second bursts, then shift position. He saw patterns in the chaos. It was this stillness that caught the eye of Commander Zaitsev. Not the Zaitsev yet, but Victor, a grim-faced senior sergeant with eyes that missed nothing. He'd watched the skinny, intellectual boy not panic, not pray, but observe. "You, with the quiet eyes," Zaitsev had grunted, pulling Anatoly from a trench full of the dead. "Can you actually shoot that thing, or are you just carrying it for fashion?" Anatoly could shoot. The Komsol club had taught marksmanship, but his true teacher had been his grandfather, an old hunter from the taiga, who taught him to read the wind, the sway of a branch, the tension in an animal's posture. "The bullet is already in the heart," his grandfather would say. "Your job is just to send it back in time." Zaitsev tested him on a shattered wall, painting a crude Nazi helmet 50 meters away. Anatoly, his world shrinking to the circle of his iron sights, the rise and fall of his breath, the subtle pulse in his fingertip, fired. The bullet struck just below the helmet's rim. He adjusted, a millimeter of elevation in his mind, and fired again. A direct hit, center mass. "Good," Zaitsev said, a word that sounded like a supreme compliment. "Forget the rifle division. You're a sniper now. Your job is not to kill Germans. Your job is to make them afraid of the air, to make them think every shadow, every window, every pile of rubble has an eye and the finger waiting for them. You will turn the very ground beneath them into a threat." And so, Anatoly Chekov became Molchun, the silent one. Paired with a boisterous Ukrainian miner named Dmitro as his spotter, they entered the silent, intimate war within the war. They learned the grammar of the ruins, how light moved through a particular shattered window at 10 a.m., casting a telling shadow, how a pile of bricks would settle with a distinct sound if disturbed, which routes the German messengers used to cross between strong points, They kept a sniper's log, a meticulous ledger of kills, with details of wind, distance, and circumstance. It was clinical, detached. They weren't killing men. They were removing tactical assets. At least, that's what Anatoly told himself, at night, when the faces of the men whose last breath he'd seen through his scope would float in the darkness. Their world became a vertical one, scaling the carcasses of buildings, burrowing into the guts of factories. They fought for a stairwell, a floor, a single room. The front line was not a line at all, but a madman's quilt of pockets and holdouts, a three-dimensional maze where the enemy could be above, below, or behind you. They lived on Sukhari hardtack, melted snow, and a fierce, desperate camaraderie. Dmytro was his opposite, loud, philosophical, prone to singing soft Ukrainian folk songs in their hide. He was also a brilliant spotter, with an uncanny ability to read the landscape and spot the slightest aberration. A glint of glass where there should be none, a breath of steam in the cold, the unnatural straight line of a rifle barrel amidst organic rubble. Together, they became effective, more than effective. Their tally grew. They developed a signature, 2 quick shots, never from the same position. Rumors reached them, passed from foxhole to bunker, of a German platoon commander driven mad because 7 of his men had been felled by ghosts in a single afternoon. Anatoly felt no pride, but only a cold professional satisfaction. He was solving a complex lethal equation, and he was good at it. Until the morning, Dmytro stopped breathing.
The shot that killed Dmytro had been impossible. Their position was perfect, camouflaged from the front and sides by collapsed flooring and a dangling grand piano lid. The only angle of exposure was a tiny slit to their rear, overlooking a completely ruined, supposedly uncontested sector. It was considered their safe side. Someone had not only found that slit, but exploited it with a shot of terrifying precision from over 400 meters in poor light. Fear, cold and viscous, flooded Anatoly's gut. This was the rumor given flesh. For days, whispers had spoken of a German Überschütze, a supersniper, brought in specifically to counter Zaitsev's growing band of hunters. They called him the Headmaster, for he seemed to target only Soviet snipers and officers. His signature was a single shot to the head, clean, efficient, instructional. Anatoly's training screamed at him to move. A sniper revealed is a dead sniper. But the instinct to grieve for Dmytro, to close his friend's staring eyes, was a physical weight pinning him down. He forced his breathing to slow, his mind to clear. Think. The bullet came from the rear. He is now repositioning. He expects me to panic, to flee my hide. He will be waiting for movement. He had one advantage. The headmaster did not know Anatoly had seen the angle of the wound, had deduced the shot's origin. The hunter believed his prey was oblivious. With infinitesimal slowness, Anatoly began to move. Not toward the exit, but deeper into the ruin. He slithered on his belly like a lizard, through dust and broken porcelain, under a splintered oak table. He left his primary rifle. It was compromised. He carried only his sidearm, a Tokarev pistol, and a handful of loose rounds. For hours he moved through the skeletal building, a phantom in the gloom. He crossed into adjacent ruins, through holes blasted in communal walls, entering a network of connected destruction. He was no longer hunting the Germans. He was hunting the hunter who hunted him. The duel became a chess game played across a board of corpses and shattered dreams. Anatoly found evidence of his adversary's passing, a single 7.92mm Mauser cartridge casing, polished and carefully placed on a ledge, a taunt. A German ration tin, opened with surgical precision, the contents eaten, the tin left as a calling card. This was no ordinary soldier. This was a professional, an artist of death, who believed himself superior. Anatoly used his knowledge of physics. He rigged a simple decoy using Dmitro's helmet and a stick, placing it in a shadowed window briefly at dusk. No shot came. The headmaster was not fooled. He tried misdirection, dropping a loose brick to create noise in one sector while circling to another. But a tripwire he hadn't set, a barely visible strand of German communication wire, brushed against his leg. He froze just in time. It wasn't connected to a grenade. It was a silent alarm. The headmaster was engineering the battlefield. The cold became a character in their struggle. It seeped through Anatoly's telogrieka jacket, numbing his fingers and toes. He chewed on a piece of frozen leather to create saliva. Sleep was a luxury that meant death. He existed in a state of hyper-alertness, every nerve screaming, his senses parsing the environment for the one detail that didn't belong. On the third day, he saw it. In the bombed-out husk of the Red October factory, a section of corrugated iron roofing, dusted with snow, had a single, faint smudge, as if something had brushed against it. The smudge pointed toward a particular metal crusher, a mountainous piece of machinery with a narrow observation slit. It was a position he himself had considered and rejected, too obvious, too exposed to flanking fire. But perhaps for a supremely confident marksman, that was the point. Anatoly didn't look at it directly. He used peripheral vision, a lesson from his grandfather. Don't startle the tiger. He spent the day constructing a new hide, a coffin-like space within a collapsed furnace chimney with a view of the crusher. He scavenged a scoped rifle from a dead Soviet sniper he found frozen in his perch, his logbook filled with neat entries until a blank space where the final entry should have been. He waited. The cold was a rat gnawing at his bones. He thought of Dmitro's songs. He thought of Leningrad under its own siege. He thought of the equations of ballistics, the pure, clean logic of trajectory and velocity. It was the human element that was messy, unpredictable. Just after dawn on the fourth day, a glint. Not a lens flare, the headmaster was too good for that, but the subtle, matte black movement of a rifle muzzle as it adjusted a fraction of an inch, searching. He was there, in the crusher. Anatoly's world dissolved into the variables of the shot. Distance, approximately 120 meters. Wind, negligible, but the cold air was denser. Angle, slightly downward. He inhaled, let half of it out, and felt his heartbeat slow as his finger took up the slack on the trigger. The crosshairs settled not on the slit, but on a spot just behind the edge of the metal where a man's head would be if he were aiming outward. He sent the bullet back in time. The crack of the shot was obscenely loud in the morning stillness. An answering shot snapped past his position a split second later, chipping brick a foot from his head. The headmaster was still alive. Anatoly's shot had been off, or the German had moved at the last microsecond. What happened next defied all sniper doctrine. A figure emerged from the crusher, not crawling, not fleeing, but standing up in full view. He was tall, wearing a custom white camouflage smock, his face pale and sharp under a fur-lined cap. He held no rifle. He simply looked directly toward Anatoly's hide, gave a slight, almost courteous nod, and then walked, unhurriedly, behind a standing column of machinery, disappearing from view. It was an invitation, a challenge to finish this not as distant technicians of death, but as men. Anatoly's blood roared in his ears. Every instinct told him to stay hidden, to reposition, to regain the advantage. But another part of him,
The part that had seen Dmitro's still warm blood seep into the Stalingrad dust, understood. This was no longer about the war, the motherland, or even survival. This was primal, personal. He rose from his hide, his joints screaming in protest. He moved toward the column, pistol held low. The ruins were a cathedral of silence. He stepped around the column. The German officer stood waiting, his hands empty. Up close, he was older than Anatoly had imagined, with fine lines around his eyes and a calm, detached expression. He spoke in precise academic Russian. "You are not Zaitsev. You are too young, but you are very, very good." "You killed my friend," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "I have killed many friends," he replied. "It is our profession." He gestured to the hellscape around them. "In this place, we are not soldiers. We are archaeologists of the future, sifting through the ruins of civilization. Our work is simply more accelerated." "Why show yourself?" Anatoly asked, his finger tense on the trigger. "Curiosity," the German said, "to see the face of the one who almost ended my work, and to offer you a choice. You could come with me. Your talent is wasted here. In the new world, men like us will be valued, not as cannon fodder in a battle for a pile of bricks, but as specialists." Anatoly stared. The offer was so surreal, so divorced from the reality of starvation, ice, and death surrounding them, that it took a moment to comprehend. This man saw the war as a temporary inconvenience, a messy interlude before a new order where efficiency and skill would be the only currencies. He thought of Dmitro's songs. He thought of Leningrad under its own siege. He thought of the equations of ballistics, the pure, clean logic of trajectory and velocity. It was the human element that was messy, unpredictable. He thought of Dmitro's songs. He thought of the men in his platoon sharing their last crumbs of bread. He thought of the burned villages he'd seen on the long retreat to the Volga. He thought of the pure, elegant logic of his grandfather's teachings, which had nothing to do with a new world and everything to do with the dignity of the hunt, the respect for life, even in taking it. "My grandfather taught me," Anatoly said slowly, "that the land knows the hunter's heart. This is his land, not yours." A flicker of disappointment, then resignation passed over the German's face. He gave another slight nod. "Then we finish our business." His hand moved toward his belt. Anatoly's Tokarev barked once. The German staggered back, a look of profound surprise on his face, and collapsed against a broken gear wheel. Anatoly approached, his pistol raised. The German's hand fell away from an unopened holster on his belt. He hadn't been going for a weapon, but perhaps a final note, a photograph. Anatoly stood over him. The sharp, academic eyes were clouding over, fixed on the iron-gray Stalingrad sky. "The equation," the German whispered, blood on his lips. "It was balanced." And then he was gone. Anatoly sank to his knees, the adrenaline draining away, leaving a vast, hollow exhaustion. He did not search the body for identification. He didn't want a name, a rank, a story. He took the man's sniper log, a beautifully crafted leather-bound book filled with precise notations in Gothic script, and his unique sniper scope. Then he walked away, back toward the Volga, back toward the living.
He reported to Zaitsev, handed over the log and the scope. "The headmaster?" Zaitsev asked, his eyes boring into Anatoly's face. "He's finished," Anatoly said, his voice empty. Zaitsev looked at the young man's face, aged a decade in a week, and simply clasped his shoulder. "Go, sleep. The war isn't over." But for Anatoly Chekov, a part of it was. He had faced the ultimate abstraction of the enemy and found in the end not a monster or an ideology, but a man. Brilliant, arrogant, and utterly wrong. And in defeating him, he had not won a victory for the motherland, but had merely survived a personal apocalypse. The silence that followed was no longer threatening. It was just silence, vast and empty, waiting to be filled by the sounds of a world that would, somehow, have to be rebuilt from the ashes. He was still a sniper, still Molchun, but the shot he had fired behind the column was the last one he ever fired with anything resembling hate. From then on, it was always just a job, a terrible, necessary equation in the long, brutal arithmetic of a war that had stolen his friend and his innocence in a single silent breath.